What's the strangest thing you've ever gotten off to that you regret now? Story 1. So, this happened back when I was living with a few roommates in a cheap apartment. You know the type: thin walls, squeaky doors, the occasional centipede making surprise appearances in the bathroom. Classic early 20s broke but functional kind of place. Among our little friend group, there was this girl, let's call her Elle. I had the biggest crush on her for years. Like, not just she's cute, I mean full-on butterflies, weird fantasies of grocery shopping together, imagining how she'd look at our wedding. That kind of hopeless, unrequited devotion. She was funny, smart, easy to talk to, and just cool in that effortless way that only made it worse. I never told her how I felt, because I knew she was way out of my league and, let's face it, I didn't want to ruin the friendship. Well, one night I came home late from work, grabbed some leftovers, and went to chill in my room. A little while later, I heard the front door open, nothing new. But then I hear her voice. She was in there with my roommate. Within minutes, it's clear they're not here to hang out and play Mario Kart. I was sitting on my bed, frozen with this terrible mix of heartbreak, rage, and some feelings I am not proud of. The walls were thin, and I could hear everything, and I mean everything. It was like the universe had decided to put my feelings into a blender and hit puree. The worst part was her voice. Even muffled through drywall, it was too much. All those years of crushing came to a weird, painful head in the dumbest way imaginable. I couldn't help but relieve my dong listening to them. It was my bitterest diddle. And then just when I thought it couldn't get more soul-crushing, I heard her say with full-on disappointment in her voice, "Oh, that's it. It was brutal." Dude, lasted like 3 minutes. Max. I am not even exaggerating. And the tone in her voice was less sultry whisper, more disappointed Yelp review. And there I was, sitting in the dark, heartbroken, humiliated, and weirdly jealous of a guy who just got roasted mid-hookup through a wall. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have done much better, and knowing that only made me feel worse. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. When I was like 18, there was this girl in my church who was obviously too young for me to have any feelings for whatsoever, but she was flirty as heck and had cute eyelashes. She wore a tight white denim miniskirt to church one day and kept sitting next to me, rubbing her legs against my legs and leaning over real close to me, swishing her hair around. After youth church was done, before the big sermon started, I was scheduled voluntold to take on nursery duties for the day. So I was basically supposed to sit up in the big nursery and listen to the main sermon through a little speaker in the room and watch through the big window they had overlooking the church. There was just one baby in the nursery that day, and the baby was sleeping. So I snuck into the bathroom right next to the nursery and soloed one out, with a baby sleeping in the next room, and the sounds of the church singing hymns for the background noise. As I was finishing, I panicked, because I didn't have a rag and there was nowhere for me to spill it, so I basically just straddled the toilet and let it out directly into the toilet water, then flushed it. Honestly, by the time I was done, I wasn't even fantasizing about the church girl. I was just watching myself diddle it while holding a toilet. It wasn't even satisfying or anything, it just felt like some stupid kind of chore. But it killed the awkward, on-again, off-again stiffy for a little while. Story 3. Well, I thought I was listening to a young woman in the throes of passion. My first ever apartment was a tiny basement unit with only 2 windows, one in each bedroom. The one in my room looked out into an equally tiny backyard, which was nestled between about a dozen houses. I knew that a couple of those dwellings were home to families of Chinese immigrants, but there were also a fair number that were occupied by students. That, combined with the relatively frequent rate of turnover, meant that one could never be completely sure of who lived where, or what sorts of habits they had. As such, my imagination ran wild when I heard the girl in question. I could barely make out the soft thrum of her toy, the breathy gasps as she approached the peak, and the quietly restrained moans that she'd let out every few seconds, and it was all too easy to picture her arching her back and moving her hips forward. For the briefest of moments, I thought about seeking her out, knocking on her door, and asking if she'd like company. It was a crazy fantasy, to be sure, but nonetheless, a compelling one. After a few minutes of listening though, and after the blood had returned to my brain, I noticed that the young woman was just a little bit too regular with her various noises. The buzz of the toy was easy enough to account for, of course, but it seemed odd that she'd moan and gasp in such a predictable pattern. Moreover, that pattern seemed familiar somehow. It eventually dawned on me that I'd left my rotating fan on in the living room. The moans were the squeaks that it made when it swiveled, and the breathy gasps were from the air rustling some papers. Story 4. I was watching the Smurfs movie, the one with Neil Patrick Harris, and there's this scene where he's playing the guitar. Now, hear me out. It's not that I have a thing for him, because I know he's gay and I am not attracted to him in that way. But the way the camera was angled, it was positioned in a way that it was almost like where it would be my view if I were giving him a blowy. It instantly charged me up, and I am ashamed to say I totally soloed one out thinking of that later that day. I am a single mom, by the way. I know he's gay, and I have zero attraction to him. Just that one scene did it for me. I know. It's definitely a cheap date moment, for sure. Story 5. I had a huge crush on this girl, and one day I worked up the courage to talk to her. I noticed she was chewing gum, and I thought, okay, asking for a piece of gum will be a casual, non-creepy way to start a conversation. So, I casually asked her if she had any gum, and she told me she had the last piece in her mouth, but she pulled it out and jokingly offered it to me. I remember being so excited and kind of overwhelmed, and I was like, okay, thanks. Without even thinking about it, she handed it to me, and I walked away feeling like I'd just made the most successful social interaction of my life. I went home and soloed one out to the chewing gum. But here's the thing, looking back on it, I am pretty sure I overestimated the whole experience. I didn't really get why I was so hyped about it at the time, but I just remember being way more excited than I should been. Being a teenager just makes everything feel like a big deal, doesn't it? Story 6. So there I was, doing what any curious, internet-enabled person does when they're alone, bored, and wearing headphones. I'd queued up a video, got comfy, and as things escalated, closed my eyes, to really immerse in the moment. Everything's going fine. The audio's loud, my door's shut, and I am just vibing in my own little world. But then, right as I am about to reach the point of no return, I hear this voice right in my ear. Not in the usual audio mix kind of way, like spatially, right next to me. A deep, raspy, grizzled man's voice says, with what felt like wet enthusiasm, "Oh, that's hot." I froze for half a second, heart pounding out of my chest, and in that strange, panicked blur, my brain went, well, if I am about to get absolutely destroyed by a ghostly pervert, I might as well finish strong. 12 out of 10 logic, I know. So, I did. Then I opened my eyes. Nobody. I was completely alone. The room was empty. The door was still closed. Windows were shut. No one was in the hallway. No shadows. No creaking floorboards. Just me, breathing heavily and questioning every life choice I'd ever made. That's when I rewound the video, and sure enough, it was the cameraman in the video, getting a little too into his job behind the scenes. His voice had been mixed super close to the mic, and in headphones, it sounded exactly like he was right next to me. I've never been the same since. To this day, I can't hear a raspy voice in surround sound without involuntarily flinching. Shout out to that cameraman though. Truly immersive work. 0 by 10. Would not recommend. Story 7. I had a pen pal, and it was just a thing in that program that we started with exchanging our school pictures, but we were encouraged to share other pictures as well. That is, through the mail, with our handwritten letters. It was the early 2000s and sharing pictures was just not the same. Anyway, one day she sends me a picture of her with a few friends, all just laughing, and because I was hormonal and not very subtle about my flirting with a pen pal, she included something in her letter like, "Here's a picture from the trip my friends and I took. Don't whip your stuff to it." It wasn't even a hot picture. Everyone was modestly clothed, and she wasn't really my type, nor were her friends, but I think just because I was told not to, I soloed off to that picture once or twice a day for a week or two out of sheer defiance. Story 8. No matter how depraved, weird, or disgusting it was, I have never regretted a self-diddle session in my life. Not one. But the weirdest things are undoubtedly some of the videos I've seen on the internet. There's some truly out there stuff on that site. ranging from the disturbing to the sick. I know it's meant to shock or entertain, but I can't help getting excited sometimes and getting into my element. One that stood out to me was a parody of the movie Ted, with an evil plush bear that came to life and pounded her, against her will, a crying Japanese girl. Good times. Story 9. So I was about 14 and I had this big plan to go on a date with a girl from school. We were going to see Speed at the cinema. I'd heard it was a great movie and, well, it seemed like a cool thing to do. The whole movie date thing was pretty exciting in my mind. But things didn't really go according to plan. Right before the date, I started getting cold feet. I wasn't sure about the girl anymore. I wasn't really feeling the whole vibe, but at that point, I didn't want to cancel, so I came up with a plan. I'd go see the earlier showing of Speed by myself. No one would know, right? Well, as it turns out, the movie was a lot more intense than I expected. Keanu Reeves was, of course, a total action hero, but Sandra Bullock had this amazing charm that made everything just feel electric. The action scenes had me on the edge of my seat. And to be honest, I got a little overwhelmed by all the adrenaline and other things. To make a long story short, I ended up sitting there in the dark, under my jacket, soloing off while trying to focus on the movie. Once the movie ended, I felt pretty embarrassed about the whole situation. So, I did the only logical thing. I bolted. The girl was waiting outside the cinema, expecting me to show up like a normal person, and instead of facing her, I panicked and ran away. I literally jumped on a bus and went home. I am now totally gay. Story 10. As a young college student, I also worked part-time as a paramedic at a hospital emergency room. Late one night, a call came in from a young man with a medical issue. I asked what the problem was. He said he was bleeding and wondered if he should come in. I asked where he was bleeding. He replied from his dong. I said that sounded serious to me and to immediately come in. He showed up shortly after with a bloody towel stuffed in his pants. The ER doctor came into the treatment room, removed the towel and asked the patient what happened as it appeared his dong was a cut-up, bloody mess. He told the doctor that he was working on his vacuum cleaner after taking a shower and didn't have any clothes on when all of a sudden he accidentally turned the switch on and the vacuum sucked his dong into the motor. The doctor and I just looked at each other and then the doctor said, "Yeah, right." And then he turned to the nurse and said, "Let's get him ready for immediate surgery." They had to call in a urologist that specialized in reconstructive surgery. That guy was still in surgery when I got off duty at 7 in the morning. I remember when he was filling out his admittance paperwork. He was employed as a salesman at a car dealership in Federal Way, Washington State. This was back in 1977 or 78. Story 11. I am a female and once I was just having a regular night in. You know, winding down, relaxing in bed, letting my thoughts wander into familiar spicy territory. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual mental highlight reel of attractive people. Romantic fantasy scenarios, that kind of thing. My imagination was doing all the heavy lifting and I was fully in the zone. Then, completely out of nowhere, I looked down at my hand doing its thing and had the most intrusive random thought of my life. What if I had a dong right now? Like my brain just derailed the entire vibe and went full alternate universe on me. One moment I was imagining candlelight and passion. The next I was mentally swapped into a whole different anatomy, wondering what it would feel like to experience that perspective. And the wildest part is, it kind of worked. Instead of breaking the mood, it intensified everything. My brain just ran with it. It was like my imagination suddenly installed a new DLC, and I was left lying there afterwards, absolutely bewildered and staring at the ceiling like, what the heck was that? It wasn't something I had ever thought about before. I never even questioned my identity or anything like that. It was just one of those bizarre, vivid brain moments that hit you from the side like, hey, try this angle. Needless to say, I sat with that feeling for a while. It didn't spark any big identity crisis or anything. I am still me, still solid on who I am, but it definitely made me realize that brains are weird. Story 12. I am a straight male. When I was 18 or 19, I was talking on the phone with a guy friend for over an hour. This was in the 90s. Totally unrelated to that phone call or the guy, I felt extremely titillated. At first, I tried to ignore it, but eventually hormones won out. Instead of cutting the call short to take care of business, I quietly did it while still maintaining the conversation. I used the mute button liberally, so the sound cutting out repeatedly must have sounded weird. I think I did ask him to hold for a second, when I was ready to finish. My friend never said anything though. I felt like such a creep afterwards. That was the one and only time I did anything like that over the phone. Story 13. One night, I was staying in a hotel room, trying to get some sleep, and I could hear the couple next door banging very loudly. They were so loud that I couldn't get any rest, and it was starting to drive me crazy. So, since it was keeping me awake, I started to solo off, out of spite, with my ear to the wall, imagining how uncomfortable they would be at that moment if they knew I was doing it, because that's how I felt about them. Pure retribution. It's the closest I've ever come to a three-way. Story 14. This is difficult to admit, but I used to work for this super small company, and it was basically just me and the owner. We both had separate workstations in the same room, each with 3 monitors, and he was sitting just 6 feet away from me. I did some tests and realized that he couldn't see my monitor on the right side, so naturally I made the decision to use that monitor to watch porn. I manipulated my Spongebob until I was relieved. I was so ashamed and terrified that he would one day very easily catch me. I had a serious problem. One day I decided if I wore an athletic cup to work, I wouldn't be able to solo off 6 feet from a grown man, but I was wrong. I will assure you that it was incredibly difficult, but I managed it somehow. I ended up quitting the job just because I couldn't live with myself. Story 15. Back in high school, my best friend and I were tight. Like we used to spend every day at each other's house. His home basically became my second home. Sleepovers, gaming marathons, late-night snacks, the whole deal. Now, here's where things start getting weird. His mom was, for lack of a better term, well-known among our group. Not in a bad way. She was just one of those moms who had this effortlessly put-together look. Stylish, confident, charismatic. So naturally, as dumb teens do, there were jokes. Your mom's a total cheetah type stuff. Crude, immature. The usual nonsense boys spew when their brains are still loading. One day, completely out of the blue, my best friend dropped this bomb on me. He had pictures of his mom, not ones he took, thank God, but ones that her boyfriend at the time had taken. No one really asked how he got them, and honestly, I didn't want to know. Then came the offer. You want them? I sell them. I was young, dumb, and had the critical thinking skills of a damp sponge. So, with all the wisdom of a teenager making a permanently regrettable decision, I said, sure, handed over some cash, and ended up with a set of pictures I absolutely should not have had. I convinced myself it was harmless. Nobody knew except me and my best friend. It was this weird, secret, shame-coated piece of stupidity that somehow felt normal in the moment. For about a year, I held on to them, even started to kind of forget where they came from, just mentally disconnected from the fact that this was his mom. Then everything changed. One afternoon, I got a text from a mutual friend. Did you hear about the friend's mom? She had been offed by that same boyfriend. Brutally, it was all over the local news. I remember sitting in my room, completely frozen, staring at my phone. The guilt hit like a freight train. I felt sick. I couldn't believe it. That night, I went out to the backyard, started a bonfire, and burned the photos. I didn't think much. I just needed them gone. My best friend never brought it up again. We stayed close, but something between us shifted. Maybe he just blocked it out. Maybe he didn't want to remember that he ever gave them to me. I don't know. We never spoke of it. Story 16. The weirdest one was probably this messy blonde woman I found on the internet many years ago. I can't remember her name at all, but I remember she was absolutely covered in a viscous liquid. Some blue, some yellow. However, I am also a man who can solo one out no matter the circumstances. Watching TV and feeling like a tug? No problem. I don't really need a material, the sensation is enough for me. So even if I am listening to Colbert talk about Trump, I am good to go. Story 17. Alright, here's a story. It was not what I was soloing it to, but when I was doing it, it was a typical morning for me. I woke up, got on the computer for my morning solo session, did my thing, cleaned up, and then turned on the TV, and then bam, The first tower of the World Trade Center had just fallen. I felt kind of guilty about that one for a minute. For years, people talked about where they were when the towers fell, and I was just there having my own moment. Story 18. Here's something from my younger days. I was playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time. Snake meets this girl who's managed to smuggle something into the prison, and when he asks how she got it past the guards, she gives this reply along the lines of, "Us girls have an extra place to hide things." And yeah, the way she says it was definitely suggestive. Honestly, I just paused the game right there and soloed one out immediately. Story 19. First, a little backstory. My ex had done some porno films before we got together. To be honest, I really didn't like watching them. It wasn't about the actual content. It was more about the weird feeling I got, like he was somehow cheating on me, even though logically I knew he wasn't. It just didn't sit right with me. So I avoided watching his stuff altogether. Fast forward to after we broke up. I was feeling lost, emotional, and a little vulnerable. One day, I stumbled upon some of his old videos. I don't know what made me do it, but I ended up watching them, and then for some inexplicable reason, I kept watching them for weeks. Here's the thing, every time I did, I couldn't stop myself from getting really emotional. I would cry every single time. It wasn't about the video itself, or even the memories of our relationship. It was like some twisted way of processing the breakup, I guess. The mix of emotional vulnerability and, well, the intensity of the situation just felt overwhelming. It was oddly cathartic, but also painful, and I couldn't seem to stop. It wasn't even sensual. It was almost like I was punishing myself for something I couldn't even fully articulate. After about a month of this, I realized how wrong it felt. I wasn't getting any closure, just more confused and regretful. I think the whole experience was less about the videos and more about me processing the end of a relationship in a weird, unhealthy way. Looking back, I definitely regret it. I don't know why I put myself through that emotional roller coaster, but I won't ever forget that time. Story 20. Okay, so this is a bit of a really awkward confession, but I guess it's a weird moment from my youth that I am both proud of and completely ashamed of. So picture this. I was in a minivan with my family on a long road trip. Everyone but the driver was asleep, and I was sitting there with a book. Now, this wasn't just any book. It was a chapter of a story that had been building up to this incredibly intense, passionate scene. Now, I didn't mean for things to go where they did, but I guess my brain just got carried away. I was tired, so I kind of closed my eyes for a second, just to rest. And the next thing I knew, I was in it. If you catch my drift, there I was. Just a bit of movement under my clothes, and well, it all escalated pretty quickly. Let's just say it wasn't long before I ended up having a moment of release in the middle of a road trip. The craziest part is, I just went back to being chill about it and fell asleep like nothing happened. But now, as an adult, I look back, and I can't help but think, what in the world was I thinking? Part of me feels a weird sense of pride about it, like I got away with something, but at the same time, I am so embarrassed. Story 21. I don't know if anyone remembers Def Jam Vendetta. That was a game that had some very interesting content hidden in it. There was this section called Eye Candy, where you could unlock photo sets of real-life models. The characters in the game were based on these models, so it wasn't just digital art, but actual photos. At the time, I was playing through the game enough to unlock all the girlfriends in the game, which gave me access to every single photo set for each character. I remember playing through the game enough times to unlock every single girlfriend in the game, gaining access to all 5 photo sets for each and every girl, and I just solo off to it until I fell asleep. I miss you, Deja. A.K.A. Page Gray. Story 22. When I was young, I was staying over at my grandma's house for the weekend. It was just me and her, and after a cozy dinner and some quiet time, she went to bed early, leaving me alone in the living room with a stack of old magazines and a sleepy house. Now, hormonal brains are strange and mysterious machines. You're full of curiosity, emotions, and absolutely zero good judgment. Somewhere in this random pile of dusty magazines was a science issue featuring a sleek, humanoid robot woman, kind of like something out of a 90s sci-fi film. Weirdly elegant, shiny, and just futuristic enough to confuse my younger self's perception of attraction. Anyway, without going into too much detail, let's just say my curiosity got the best of me. Afterwards, I was left with a messy situation, and I couldn't exactly go to the bathroom to clean up. It was outside the main house, and my grandma had this massive, unhinged dog in the yard, who treated me like a chew toy every time I tried to pass by. So in a stroke of genius, I grabbed a bunch of serviettes from the kitchen and stuffed them where I thought they'd help dry things up. I planned to sneak them out and toss them later. Simple. But plot twist. I fell asleep with them still in place. Morning comes, and I wake up completely forgetting about the whole situation until I notice the napkins are gone. It completely vanished. No trace. I panicked. Searched under the bed, in the blankets, behind the couch. Nothing. The only logical explanation was my sweet, quiet grandma, who definitely woke up earlier than I, probably spotted some rogue napkin corner peeking out of my shorts and silently handled it without ever mentioning a word. She never brought it up. Not once. Not even a raised eyebrow. To this day, I still randomly think about it and cringe into the next dimension, not because of the robot, but because I am haunted by the thought of my grandma having to clean up her grandson's mystery napkin situation and just carrying on with her day like nothing happened. Grandma, thank you for your service and your unspoken kindness. Story 23. So, when I was young, I was starting to figure out the whole self-discovery thing. You know, those awkward experimental years where you're kind of exploring new things on your own, but definitely not talking about it with anyone? Yeah, that. Anyway, one night, I noticed something in the bathroom that I had never really paid much attention to before: the electric toothbrush. It was sitting there, unused, just waiting for something. And in my brilliant mind, I thought, hey, why not? So, here's how it went down. I started sneaking into the bathroom every night after everyone went to bed. I'd grab the toothbrush, swap out the head for a clean one, obviously, and then go back to my room. I'd lock the door, and yeah, you can probably guess where this is going. For about a week, this became my secret nightly ritual. I was a professional at it, quiet, stealthy, and highly efficient. But then, one morning, I woke up a little earlier than usual, and as fate would have it, I ran into my mom in the kitchen before she left for work. We had a little chat, nothing unusual, until she casually mentioned how she needed to grab her toothbrush, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. She uses that toothbrush every morning. As in, it was her toothbrush. The same one I'd been borrowing every single night without realizing she was using it during the day. I nearly fainted right there. I was never awake early enough to notice, but she would just use it, put it back, and I would swoop in and take it again for my late-night activities. I am sure she had no idea, but I suddenly saw that whole situation in an entirely new light, and it was not good. I felt so gross and embarrassed. Story 24. So, there was this scene in A House of Night book, a young adult vampire fiction series. There was a scene where the main character was drinking her ex-boyfriend's blood, and he squeezed her clothed chesticles. The worst part of it was that it was a school library book, and it got, wet. I had to make up an excuse that I peed the bed. My mom made me take the book to school and pay for it. Story 25. When I was 18, at the time, I wasn't dating anyone seriously, just living my best awkward life, trying to figure out what I was doing. One day, I got a voicemail from this girl I knew. Nothing crazy, just her leaving a quick message. Totally innocent stuff like, "Hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you're doing well," or something along those lines. It was a totally normal voicemail, but for some reason, her voice just did something to me. I can't explain it. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. It wasn't anything about the message itself. I don't even remember what she said, to be honest. But when she spoke, oh my God. Her tone, the way she said my name, the little pauses she took when talking, I swear it was like I was hearing a completely different language, and I was suddenly so into it. I kept playing the voicemail over and over again, trying to figure out why this seemingly normal, everyday message was making me feel like I was losing control. Yeah, I definitely soloed off to it. Story 26. I have this interesting memory about a girl I knew. She told me that she used to, well, let's just say solo off to the smell of old library books. She said it was before I really knew what intimacy was, but it still stuck with me because, well, that's a pretty specific and unusual thing to be into. I guess the scent of the old paper and ink did something for her. What's wild is, even now, I can almost recreate that exact smell in my head without any actual books around. Like my brain somehow brings it back, as if it has some kind of sensory memory of it. It's crazy how the human brain works. Story 27. I've had a tickling obsession for as long as I can remember, and it's honestly one of those things that I feel like I was just born with. From the time I was really young, I've always found tickling to be more than just a silly, playful thing. It wasn't just something that made me laugh. It got me excited. Some people might find that strange or even kind of off-putting, but for me, it's just always been a part of who I am. At first, I didn't really understand it. It wasn't like I ever talked about it with anyone, but as I got older and started exploring the internet, I realized that I wasn't the only one. Regular tickle videos, nothing too extreme, just playful ones, definitely get me going. I guess it's the whole vulnerability aspect combined with that rush of sensation. But what really surprises me is how much I get into animated or cartoon-style tickling clips. There's just something about the exaggerated, sometimes absurd nature of the animation that makes it all the more exciting. It's like the whole thing becomes more playful and less real-world, if that makes sense. Story 28. I soloed off to some Oprah magazines my mother had. I would search for the swimsuit pictures in them. One had a hot picture of a couple in it on the article's starting page. My parents had the internet locked under a password, so I couldn't use it if I tried. This was back in dial-up days, so that was the next best thing, I suppose. Story 29. I've always considered myself a fairly normal person. Like I enjoy watching cartoons, playing video games, hanging out with friends, and just the usual stuff. But one day, I came across a scene from Spongebob SquarePants that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Now, we all know Spongebob has some weird episodes. But for some reason, there was this one particular scene during a karate fight between Spongebob and Sandy, and I'll admit, I was completely caught off guard by how intense it got. I don't know what happened at that moment, but my brain went into overdrive and I found myself replaying that scene over and over, soloing off to it, obviously. Story 30. I had this one weird summer routine back when I was living in my hometown. There was this secluded spot by the river that no one ever really went to, so I would sneak down there, pop in my earbuds, and just listen to Lana Del Rey on repeat. I got really into the whole vibe and would end up going to town for hours, lost in the music. I didn't really regret it until one time, which is also the last time I accidentally bumped my speakers while I was in the middle of soloing and it fell into the water. Story 31. Our family once had a maid. She was very attractive with great front and back packages. Not to mention, she would wear these very casual but super revealing clothes around the house. At first I didn't think much of it, but over time I started noticing her habits, like leaving her door open while she slept, or sometimes being in situations where I could catch glimpses of her without meaning to. It started innocently enough with just casual observations, but then I found myself getting a bit obsessed with it. There was a time when I went into her room while she was asleep thinking no one would know, and I soloed off to her sleeping. I just went and took a gamble, lol. There were also times when I would solo off upstairs while looking down at her chesticles as she prepares lunch downstairs. Eventually, my curiosity went a little too far, and I started snooping around for her inners, even going so far as to wear them and make a mess in it before returning it. Good times. Story 32. So, years ago, my family went on this 3-week camping trip, and it was honestly a mix of fun and frustration. There was barely any internet reception, except for a little bit late at night if you were lucky, and there was practically no privacy at all, so you can imagine how weird it was for a teenager trying to figure out their own curiosity with barely any space to do anything. The public showers were pretty much the only place I could get some privacy, but even then, it wasn't exactly ideal. I remember one time I was in my own stall, just doing my thing, and a lady walked into the stall next to me. It's funny looking back because that moment triggered a whole bunch of thoughts in my head. All I had to go on was imagining what she might look like in there, which was honestly more than enough for me to get lost in my thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.